Well, good morning everyone and welcome to the show. Today is a little bit different. And why is that, Fernando?
I don't know, what were we trying to do?
Exactly. Well, we just filmed Mega Movie. There was some extra parts left over, and what we're gonna do is this one in particular. I was like, man, this was fun. We had a lot of good time building it. It was Victor's car. We put a Halo9 in the dash. And it was a lot of work. It was a ton of work. He's had it in his car before, and he wanted to make sure that there was no wobble at all to it. So we built up his dash super solid, but we didn't film an intro for it because it was made to be part of the Mega Movie.
We put some concrete on it so it doesn't move.
Yeah, no doubt. Enjoy as we take you through mounting the ILX
309.
Boom. Enjoy. Well, next we have a 2019 Toyota Tacoma. And the reason why we wanted to highlight this is because it has the factory touchscreen. Even though it's a brand new 2019, it's missing features like Android Auto, Apple Carplay. And there's nothing special about adding a radio to a dash. You know, it's a dash kit, it's a wiring harness. In this case, we're using a Maestro RR so we can add the tire pressure sensors into the radio, the door, and the gauges, and all the cool features that make upgrading your factory radio to an aftermarket on such a new vehicle a sellable thing. The big thing we wanted to talk about, he's going with the floating screen Alpine radio, the Halo9. He likes that floating screen look, and he wants to put it in his new vehicle that didn't come with it. That means we're going to take you through the process that we do in order to make sure that heavy screen can go back into this factory location and suspend out from the dash. It has to be able to not wiggle when you're driving because that's really annoying. The goal here is to make it look and feel as factory as possible if Toyota was to do that floating screen in this car. What we need to do is get that factory radio out of the dash and build a mounting structure for it. When you first get into the vehicle, you have to take a look and see what features we're going to be retaining from the factory. Yeah, steering wheel control buttons here, have phone icons, push to talk. We have a USB aux jack located down here. Start the vehicle up. We have a backup camera. And then I also like to go through the radio and see if there's any hidden features that might have anything to do with the car. We want to make sure that the interface we're going to use to do it will retain those. Now, navigating through some of these factory radios can be a struggle, and I can understand why people want to get rid of them. This radio does have navigation. We'll be able to retain the factory navigation antenna. It also has Sirius XM that he is not interested in retaining. There are a couple other little features in there, such as miles per gallon and whatnot, but those mainly have to do with the GPS system. We're gonna go ahead and get this radio out of the dash. For this, it's a pretty straightforward deinstallation process. This just has a trim around the radio that comes off, and then we can unbolt the radio. This radio has 4 10mm bolts holding it in place. Take a moment to just look over the harness, see what's going on. A lot of the times when we're doing these Toyotas, they cover it in this plastic here. Depending on what type of system is going in the car, we may remove this and then recover it in exterior Tessa tape if it's a room issue. There's a large cavity here. We might be able to retain it. What I want to do is locate where the factory antennas are in this particular vehicle to make sure they're going to function for us. The GPS is located right around here, which is good. They make antenna adapters that will allow us to retain those, and also the Sirius XM antenna if he was to keep his Sirius XM. The factory GPS is located right here. They make an adapter for that, and the RR will retain his factory backup. Let's head over to the bench and start assembling this mount. The goal in my mind is to try to retain as much of the factory peripherals as possible. So the factory USB, we want to retain that. Though we can retrofit in behind it anything we need to, having a convenient cable for that and doing the research to find it is well worth the time you spend. This will allow us to retain the factory navigation antenna, so I won't have to use the one that came with the radio. And then if we wish to retain the Sirius XM, we can go ahead and plug this in. The antenna is also a crucial element to which you'd want to retain. This has an amplified antenna system. In the past, cars would have power antennas where they'd have an aerial that goes up and down. That's pretty much over. We don't have those anymore, but what we do have, boosted antennas. Most of the complaints we get from people that say they don't get good FM reception are they forget to connect this wire, or they don't even realize what it's for. They get it confused with, let's say, an amp turn on or something like that, and they feel that they're not using the factory amplifier, then they don't need to hook this up. This harness here is going to allow us to integrate into that factory plug and do things like retain our factory backup camera. There's an OBD2 connection that needs to go over. That's what's going to give this radio those extra options like gauges, tire pressure, the door being open. All that is going to be controlled by this, which is the brain that is going to take all that information in, translate it, and feed it into our radio. One of the nice things about this particular module, this is a flash to use module, which means when you go to put it into the car, you have to plug it into the computer and tell it make, model, year, radio that's going to be interfacing with, and then that'll give you the most up-to-date software version for the radio and the car on this brain. Not that other manufacturers you can't flash, but sometimes that does get overlooked. They do make a dash kit for this car, as well as we have the metal factory brackets. What we need to do is get these both apart. This particular kit actually comes with two different mounts depending on which car you got. So we want to grab our factory bezel and compare the two. It's definitely not that one. So this one does go in there nicely and fill the hole. So we will be constructing off of the bigger bezel. One of the things that gets overlooked most when people are installing in is the instructions. I don't know why this is such a strange concept that there's instructions for something and that somebody wrote them. Now granted, sometimes the people that write these don't do the best job, but they're here. We should be able to kind of figure out what they're saying. In this case, they give you how to remove the radio and then how to assemble their dash kit, which is important. It's, after all, their dash kit and the way they designed it. There's probably some thought process that went in behind it. I can't tell you how many cars will come here that they'll ask us to go out and look at, and they'll be like, the dash kit doesn't fit right, and they'll have done something that totally makes no sense, and it's like, why did you? No, I didn't. It's like IKEA, you gotta follow the instructions. There are a couple different ways manufacturers have decided to assemble dash kits. This one is one of my personal favorites in that the front bezel and the rear supports attach to one another, and then the radio goes in place. That allows you to make what I feel is the most solid mount. It will go in and everything is already mounted in the dash, then the factory snaps over it. This is rigid, nothing else matters. The second style is where this bezel here gets attached to the factory, and then these mounts are attached to the radio. You have to sandwich them together afterwards, and the problems you run into there are that doesn't always work that well. You have to play with these a lot, pulling them in, pulling them out, lining them up, moving the radio up, moving the radio down, and not every manufacturer does a really good job of that concept. It gets kind of hokey. However, depending on which bracket system we go with, we might actually end up doing it that way. With that being said, I'm just going to prep this kit, get it ready, get the brackets off of here, and then we'll move forward from there. If we are going to be retaining these factory brackets, we're going to need a couple measurements. And what I need to know is the distance from this clip to here, which would be the same position as this on the kit. That way when I'm attaching these to this, I have that number, so if I line the two up, essentially that should mean I'm exactly where I need to be. On the Toyota middle bracket, there's these little nipples here that are designed to line up with the factory radio. For those, we do need to remove. And there are two screw provisions that do line up on these brackets. Sometimes you get lucky, so we're gonna go ahead and try those first. This is about 3/8 difference from where we had the factory radio. I'm gonna take this into the car now and test this measurement. Nope. It's actually almost the perfect depth for what we're trying to do. Because this isn't attached to this, I've gone ahead and put some blue tape on there to hold it in place while we're doing our test fitting. I did want it back a little bit more because I'm going to cut a panel that fills this. I would like to just cover all of this. I might cut the factory holes a little bit so that the radio will slide back 1/16 of an inch. Other than that, we just need to level it up, and this will work for us. We're not done. This is just making sure that we're using the strongest brackets, but we still need to reinforce it because this screen is heavy, and if I grab this like this, it's still moving a little bit. We want to make sure it doesn't do that. So I want to mark the area that I want to trim out on both sides. Now we'll switch to a metal grinding bit. We want to take some measurements and see if we can get this all leveled up. So our measurements on the radio are good, but that doesn't mean that the measurements in the car are. Let's go fit it again. In this car, they have a couple little ledges here that when you set the radio in are designed to help level it out. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what they do. We're gonna make the trim bezel out of 16th inch, so I just wanna make sure it clears, and it does. So we have the right depth on the radio. I just need to get a tape measure and measure the height. I think it's a little low on this side. So it is a 16th of an inch low on this side, which I'm gonna have to adjust on the radio itself and not these brackets, because when this tightens up, these all line up perfect. So now it's level. So now what we need to do is start building our bracing structure. We're going to build a bracing structure for this that will also incorporate more screw points in the dash. This has been in a previous version of his car. We had made an elaborate mounting system because he drives a lot and the radio would shake and it would drive him crazy. We want to make sure that this does not move at all. What I want to do is I want to make a piece that goes very similar to what we have from the previous car that goes across this member here. It's going to do the same across the top to hold it rigid there. I want to build an L that comes off the front of this and screw it into the car here in the front, and I think that'll get us what we need in order to hold it. Let me go cut a piece of plastic. I'll be right back. We're gonna start off with this some 1-inch thick cintra. Slide that into place. We're gonna go with a little bit shorter piece on the top. We don't want to run into any issues where it's sticking up too high and won't go into the dash. I'm going to put some foam on the back of this so that it sits nice and tight onto the radio, but we don't have to worry about if it's going to rattle or anything like that, because it is plastic on metal. For this bottom piece, we'll put some foam on it as well. Then we need to take it over into the car and figure out how far back it needs to go, as well as how far down the L will have to come in order for us to screw it into the car. This is the ledge here that I want to attach to. So I'm going to go cut a 2-inch piece right here, notch out for this, then we'll attach it to here, and that way we can line everything up just right. I'm gonna screw this onto here so that gives us that L shape we were looking for, and then we can attach it into the radio. We're gonna use our super thin tape to attach these two to one another just so they're locked in place before we drill them. We can also use this to test fit and then remove and test fit before we actually do our final assembly if we need to. So now I could take this into the car, make sure it's the right height, which I'll do, and then we can come back and screw it in. Yeah, it's a good height. Another drill bit that I love to use is this guy right here. It is a drill bit on the tip, but then it also threads in for a screw. We're gonna use that on this. So unlike a conventional drill bit, when you drill it in, it goes far enough, put the drill in reverse and pull it back out, and that leaves your thread in there for the screws to go in. This is what I wanted to go for. We can get this into the car and figure out where this needs to sit. We're also gonna bring a Sharpie with us. There is a slight bend to this dash panel, and we want this to rest flush up against here. And as long as we can hit the 2 screws in the back, fine. So now I'm gonna repeat the process. I'm gonna drill these, and then we'll test fit it one more time. This is the effect we're going for. We'll drill 4 screw holes here and attach this in, and then we'll test fit it one more time to make sure this is what we're going for, and then we'll slide the radio face on it and see if we get any wobble or if we're good like this. So with the floating screen application, you have a bunch of different mounts available to you. If you want the full experience of that floating up top screen, you can move it. If you would just like a more reserved coming out of the dash, you can do that as well. As long as you can get screwdrivers in behind the radio to screw it in place, you can go crazy. So I'm gonna attach all the screws and get it exactly where the customer feels it's gonna look the best for him. And we'll do one last slide back into place. And now we'll put our fastening screws in just to make sure it's nice and tight. See how the hole like this here, how that when we push down on it, it's what I'm wondering if I can put a piece of plastic that goes across the top here, and then maybe something that goes across the back here, like it screws into this, that makes this more rigid, because that's really where the flex is coming in. So we got the screen in, as you saw, and really where the little bit of shake is coming from is the way that these corners are attached into the car. There's no metal holding it, whereas on the bottom there's plenty of metal. It's nice and rigid there, but this whole piece is flexing. What I'm thinking is that I can make another stronger, take some of the 1-inch and go across the top here and attach it in, and then maybe do 2 verticals here and here, going back a little bit to make this whole side just kind of tie in together and way more rigid. So I'm gonna try that. So after a little bit of struggling and trying to figure out what we needed to do to make this plastic more rigid here, we've come up with something. We have a multi-part system that we've come up with. This is a piece of that 1-inch thick Sintra. It goes into the top here and fastens into the dash. And then once that's in place, we have this U-shaped piece here that comes in from behind, screws into the top piece as well as into the side, making this way more rigid. And then once you attach in the radio itself, that kind of brings it all together and makes this, well, pretty super strong. When it goes in there, it looks like this, which helps to reinforce this area through here along with these areas through here, because really the only connection point they have are these little spots right there. So this makes it a lot stronger. I went ahead and cut a piece of 16th inch ABS, and I taped the dash kit up so that we can draw on it. What we need to do is figure out where the hole for the Alpine radio is, cut that into this, and then attach this into the back side of here, and then snap this over and have the Alpine hole come right through it. Sounds simple enough, right? We just want to mark where this meets up. So this hole for the radio tapers down here and here. We're gonna take this off of the radio and use this to make our template. So that's why we only need to have these lines to line it up. We'll use this as our router guide. Now this side is really thin over here, so we're gonna have to be super careful. We don't want to dig into that at all with the router. Alright, we have the perfect hole. We'll use our thin double-sided Tessa tape to hold these two pieces together. So after looking at what we got going on in the car, now that this is screwed on to here, it occurred to me that once this goes on like that, that's actually going to stay in place. This is kind of weak in this area, so what I'm going to do is actually add a piece of 1/4 inch onto this and make this front piece more rigid, and then this will just slide over it like that and lock into place. Part of the fun of building something from scratch, making things just kind of work, you really don't have a game plan, you just kind of go at it, changing the idea as far as how we're going to mount it. We can screw this into place, which will make it even more secure. Now it will all float in place, perfect. Now we can take a look at the wiring harness, because this build is done. Now anytime you're doing an iData harness, the instruction manual is downloaded when you flash it. But there's a certain amount of prep work I like to get done beforehand. For example, the harnesses that can be plugged into the car, I like to just go ahead and get them off my bench. On this particular Alpine, it's one of the few radios that actually still has output for the antenna. And because that's not the norm, I like to go ahead and solder that on now so that I don't forget. And once I've done that, I also like to remove all the tape off of these harnesses. This particular installation, we're not using any of the factory wiring, so there's no reason for us to keep the rear speaker harness in the installation. We also won't need any of these speaker wires on this harness. I've talked to the customer and he's not interested in retaining his factory aux jack, so we're going to go ahead and remove these too. Now that we have all our prep work done, it's time to flash the module and grab the instructions to make sure we need all these other parts. Launch the Web Blink application, select Flash Module, Flash by Vehicle, select Year, select make, select the model without the JBL system. They give you a great image of the steering wheel. Select that. Brand of radio, type in the model number. Then they're going to ask you for the serial number. This is the most important part. You have to make sure you have access to the serial number. It's going to tell you what software is going to download to your RR and also what harness it's going to require. Now it's going to ask you to validate what features you have from the factory. Vehicle information, steering wheel controls, it does not have a factory amplifier. You would like gauges, and it does have the secondary display. So we'll select continue. You can remap the steering wheel controls if you like, or change things around. When done, select continue. The last page is an overview of everything you've selected. If everything is how you think it should be, select flash. Once flashed, it'll go ahead and pop up and give you access to that installation guide. Scroll down until you find your vehicle. Once there, go over your installation instructions just to make sure there's no strange or unusual things. Then move on to the wire diagram. Once on the wire diagram, you'll want to look over here on the right side where it says data cable. In the box, there's typically two cables that go from the RR to the unit. One is a signal cable for backup sensors and things like that, or any communication that's coming from the vehicle that needs to get replicated through the module. And the second is the data-to-data connection. In this case, we're not going to need the signal cable, just the data-to-data connection. And that is located in the box that the RR comes in. If you look at the bottom of the page here where it says connect not required, the OBD2 plug is also not required in this installation. Other than that, any specific colors that you may or may not need, so for example it says yellow, green, not connected. Other than that, the colors are standard color. It also shows down here the small weight connector is not going to be used. That is the input for the OBD2 on the harness. You can unplug the RR at this point. It's ready to go. I like to close the computer and leave that up there just in case I need it later. Now that we've viewed the instructions and we know what we need to do, I like to take the data-to-data connection and plug it into my brain so that I don't lose it or misplace it. Next, we remove any wiring that is not needed from the instructions, and then we're going to cover all the harnesses up with exterior Tessa tape to handle the extra heat that the dash is going to have. The harness is ready. When prepping the harness, I like to build it out from the RR to the car and then over to the factory radio, making kind of a T, basic shape. Before you put it into the car, you do have to remove the RR. It is not supposed to be plugged in. You want to plug into the car, plug into the radio, plug in the RR last. We have the antenna, the backup camera, the main controller harness, basically the data harness, and then of course the main power harness. This particular radio allows us to plug in all the accessories to the harness beforehand. It's kind of a cool feature. But now we're going to take this in, get it into the car, and wrap this thing up. When plugging it in, give them a little tug, make sure they're nice and tight. Once the car's done, move on to the radio. Just kind of pay attention to your layers as far as what's stacked on top of one another. Now we can plug in the RR. Kit in place. Trim bezel. So here's our factory backup camera functioning the way it's supposed to. Our vehicle information page showing our doors open, our battery voltage, as well as all our tire pressure sensors. We have our custom gauge display. And of course the most important feature, because this brand new 2019 vehicle didn't have it, is Carplay. Whether you like the floating screen or not, entirely up to you, but being able to take a car, a new one like this, or possibly an old one, and fit something like that into it to give you that look, if that's what you're after, and add in a few extra features is pretty nice.